Sam Lisenco, you're an Emmy nominee for production design for a narrative program, Half Hour, for your work on The Bear. Now, specifically, you're nominated for the first episode of the series, System. What were some of the initial ideas you had for this setting, this kind of kitchen workplace setting when you first read the script?
The creator and showrunner is a very, very dear friend of mine who had been sort of playing around with the idea of doing this initially as a feature film for many, many years. And so there was always this conception that a sensitivity to the realism of the kitchen environment as a workplace was paramount. So much so that part of the ethos was that we needed to be able to set up the production with a methodology to allow the actors to actually practically be cooking and create a space in which our biggest production fear was actually like actors cutting fingers off. The extreme attention to the fluidity of actually preparing food on camera while delivering dialogue was always sort of our ethos. And then we discussed movies that were inspirational to us in particular, especially when this was still a feature, that there was a layer of a practical approach to production that facilitated something that felt very, very real, be it, American movies of the late 70s or specifically Chicago comedies of the 80s, a lot of the John Hughes stuff, in which space as a character was secondary to the reality of the environment, which also opened us up to exploring real kitchens and real spaces that we could potentially shrink down into a functional space that felt like it could fit in the footprint of this fictional restaurant. So it was really always allowing the space to bump up against camera and not create a space that worked best for television. Was the guiding light, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, and yeah, how do you find that balance where you're creating this physical layout, that's that contributes so much to the story and to the tension of the show, but you're also kind of accommodating, actors, production crew, and how do you find that balance?
It was a lot more akin to anything I would have associated with like choreographed dance numbers for film, in which you're coming up with a footprint of actor motion and blocking well ahead of time that is disassociated from the location, and then trying to make the practical space functional for that outline footprint. So that really just meant reconfiguring elements of practical kitchen spaces to make them work for us based on, oh, well, we need this actor to pass this actor at this point and call corner and brush up against them. So step one was really like, we started looking at, for the purposes of the pilot, we were looking at college campuses that had teaching kitchens that were exponentially larger than our needs, so that we wouldn't have to sacrifice the practical hookups of gas and water and things like that, and then make that work for us. We settled on a defunct restaurant that had an oversized kitchen space that we were able to then shrink down. And then when it went to series, that was recreated on stage by the very talented permanent art crew.
And it seems like set decoration is especially important on a show like this, where you're creating this working kitchen, with a lot of equipment. There's a lot of history attached with the family involved. What was that collaboration like with your set decorator, Emily Carter?
Yeah, it was a much more fluid relationship, I would say, between set decoration and props than I would normally gauge in a project like this. So there was a sensibility of implied practicality that I outlined in the approach to the normal discourse of designer and decorator, but it was more about like applying sentimentality and implied history to objects that exist in the space because they're also simultaneously functional. So you're talking about be it a wall of spice or their prep knives or the butcher block that has been there forever, and reaching a point of fluidity between decoration and props that in which actors feel comfortable interacting with decoration in a way that they probably wouldn't normally on other shows in the same capacity.
And you've worked on really tense kinetic stories before, like the films of the Safdie brothers, which are like Anxiety, the movie, a lot of times.
Mhm.
Did those particular projects kind of prepare you for working on this one and the demands of it and sort of style and tone of it?
Um, I think I'm hesitant to say that there's because there's an aesthetic parallel in the language of freneticism between how characters in the Bear and some of the work that I've done with the Safdies corresponds. I'm hesitant to say that there's aesthetic similarities beyond the fact that they just have the same designer. But in terms of your approach towards how you as a production person deals with the stress of the unknown, there's always a possibility that a director may say, hey, can you get us a live giraffe after lunch? And I think that what you try to do is you try to maintain a level of creative integrity and discourse the with the team, and not let that shit get to you. So it's like, well, no, I can't get you a giraffe. That's ludicrous. But I can call a guy and get a cheetah. I think being able to um, navigate that creative language for the betterment of the fiction and make sure everybody's on the same page and not get stressed out by it allows you to critically gauge whether or not you want to create an environment that appears stressful. And I think that is something that previous experiences sort of prepared me for emotionally, because otherwise you just lose your fucking mind.
And one of the interesting things about the Emmys with your nomination is a lot of times we see awards attention for production design go to fantasy or period projects, but the Emmys recognize such a wide range of production design across categories and genres and styles. And what do you think about this kind of specific realistic contemporary world building getting a chance to be recognized by your peers for it?
It's quite a compliment. My parents are thrilled, but I think it's a double-edged sword, because for me, despite some of the more realistic things that I've done in my career, I think that no matter what you're doing as a designer, be it broad fiction or period or sci-fi, whatever it winds up being, to a certain extent, you're making choices that will reiterate and solidify the audience experience with that narrative fiction. And so, if you're thinking about how good something looks, to a certain extent, it's antithetical to being lost in the fiction of the thing. And so, I think that sometimes it's easiest to recognize good design because it is so different from your day-to-day experience with how the world looks. That being said, in this regard, it's a huge testament to the fiction and the performances and the cinematography and every other department that the transformative nature of that fictional story. These people are actors; it's not real. But if you believe it enough to care, and you are lost in the world of this restaurant, it's huge. It's high praise, but it shouldn't. It's not necessarily the goal for me to be lauded over the way something looks. And instead to not be noticed, I think is the highest praise.
And certainly that's the case for contemporary. Like, you really want to create this immersive world that you're not really thinking about. Is that a different kind of approach than in a period or fantasy project that you might be working on, or is every project sort of that same kind of?
Yes and no. I mean, if the script says she sits at a desk and writes a letter, it takes the same amount of brain space as a designer or a decorator or a set dresser to place that pen as it does the desk itself. So as long as your level of consideration is there, as long as you really care about what you are creating in terms of imagery, I think you're still, to a certain extent, you're still controlling the entirety of the frame. That being said, if the Bear took place in 1930, it would be a very different conversation in terms of the level to which that world has to be built with premeditation.
Well, I want to congratulate you for your nomination for The Bear, and your work on the show. And thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for talking with me about it.
My pleasure. Thank you.